Dubai Sevens, Tales from the Sand. On Dubai Eye 103.8.
Well, hello and welcome to a brand new series of Tales from the Sand podcast. It's brought to you by Dubai Eye 103.8. It's myself, Chris McCarty, and I'm joined by, well, the brains of the operation. It is Mr. Thomas Burwell, Tournament Director of the Emirates Dubai Sevens. And Tom, I'll start with you and say hello, my friend.
Chris, hello. Good to be talking about the Dubai Sevens. It must mean that it's on the horizon. It's very exciting.
It certainly is. We're a few months away from the return of the Emirates Dubai Sevens. We're going to get to that in just a moment, Tom. But listen, anyone new to this podcast, because I know you are the mastermind behind it. You've been working diligently behind the scenes for a couple of seasons now. Give us a little synopsis. What is Tales from the Sand?
It's a classic story of something born out of a pandemic. We were desperate to create some content about the Dubai Sevens when we sadly had to cancel this time last year. So from my living room and from my staff's living room, we have spoken to the great and the good of rugby and rugby sevens, and somehow a radio station has decided to pick it up. So we are back for Series 3, and once again we'll be talking to people that have got a relationship with the tournament, that have got great stories to tell, that love rugby sevens, rugby 15s, and we're really excited for today's guest.
Indeed we are, yes, and you're absolutely right. It's been on my horizon for a while now, Tom, so it's great for us to link up, partner up on this incredible podcast. We're looking forward to what is Season 4. You mentioned our very special guest, and let me tell you, they don't come much bigger than the man who graces us with Episode 1 of this brand new season. He's a World Cup winner back in 2007. That was the same year that he won World Player of the Year. 67 tries, second on the all-time list. He's level with the legendary Jonah Lumu with 15 in World Cup history. It goes on. He's raced a cheetah. He's named after a Manchester United legend in the shape of Brian Robson. And if all of that wasn't enough, Tom, he's a man who knows Brian O'Driscoll better than Brian O'Driscoll knows himself. It is the one and only Mr. Bryan Habana. Bryan, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Hello, gentlemen. Mr. McCarty, you crack me up every time. I think the intros are getting shorter, so I'm hoping I'm either doing something right and that it's not been from me doing something wrong.
Well, Bryan, did I miss anything? I guess the first question is, did I miss anything from that introduction?
Yeah, I thought you were going to be talking about Ches and Colby. I was like starting getting a bit worried when you said one of the most exciting players in the world at the moment. So, no, you didn't miss anything. I think, did you miss anything? Well, actually started off as a scrum half is maybe something you missed. Chris, I'm not quite sure that's public knowledge to everyone. But my rugby actually started, I was a little wee, they actually called me Little Runt at school when I started playing the game. I was about 2 heads shorter than everybody else. My shoulder pads made sure that I actually didn't have a neck. And it was only sort of when Eugene Yeloff moved me from scrum half to centre when I was about 20 years old that the big break in terms of professional rugby actually started coming through.
How long did you last at scrum half, Bryan? I would imagine you didn't last long.
No, a good 6 years. Not on professional level. No, professional level. I actually only played junior level rugby in the scrum half position, unfortunately. And then I actually didn't know if it was because I wasn't a good scrum half or that he thought I'd be a better centre that Eugene actually moved me out of that. I thought I was pretty decent, but apparently it didn't really work out that way. But looking back at the 16 years I had, I'm not going to complain about the switch because it ended up going, according to some of those stats, pretty decently.
Tom, you've got a nice English name, Thomas Burwell. They don't come much more English than that. Are you named after Thomas Edison? Have you got a backstory to your name?
A Christian family is a disciple. So probably less English than it sounds given that background. So no, I am very English and very proud of that, and have watched Brian over many years break our hearts. I was there at the 2007 final. Still believe it was a score.
As you would.
But I was also there in the group stage for that game as well, also in Paris, where it was a little bit more definitive and probably a fairer result of those two teams. So excited for today's conversation about sevens and 15s, and it's great to have you, Bryan.
Yeah, Tom, just on that, I mean, obviously from the Christian heritage naming, I mean, at that 2007 final, you would then be a doubting Thomas in my books.
That's exactly what it is, and I'm reveling in that. That's comfortable. I'm very happy in that environment.
No, just as long as we're all clear. But so let's move along swiftly.
Sure.
Yeah, well, we're going to get into the rugby, but put this one to bed, Bryan. It's a quiz question that crops up all the time. Is it true you are actually named after a very famous Englishman in the shape of the former Manchester United and England captain, Bryan Robson? That's true.
That is very true. Bryan Gary Habana, named after Bryan Robson and the South African-born Manchester United goalkeeper Gary Bailey. So, yeah, I wanted to grow up becoming a export into the English Premiership as a left wing in soccer, only to know that, or not to know that, the 1995 Rugby World Cup final would absolutely change my path in life. And like I said, looking back, it was a pretty decent change that came about, Chris.
I don't want to alienate any of our listeners straight off the bat. So does that mean, Bryan, you're from a house of Manchester United fans?
Are we alienating people or not? Sorry, I'm trying to think how I answer this question.
You answer
Chris
it
is very
diplomatically.
happy with the answer that you're about to give, so you can go on.
As long as I'm not alienating anyone on this call. No, I am from a Manchester United loving family, Chris, and my boys have unfortunately also now just been passed on to the mantle. So the Manchester United garments branded Habana 11 on the back has already been displayed in their cupboards since they were in their mother's stomach, unfortunately.
And of course, they're not glory supporters like their father, in which case, right? Because they've had a tough 7-8 years. So there's no alienation here, and I think that just puts that to bed. Chris, it's been a tough time for you, mate. So.
Yeah, it has. You're absolutely right. I'll take that on the chin. Bryan and I are glory hunters. Bryan's kids are not. Listen, Bryan, you're here to talk rugby, though. I want to get into it. So much for us to discuss over the course of this podcast. I think there's only one place to start, and Tom and I were discussing this off air over the course of the past week or so. The recent Lions series and South Africa coming away with a 2-1 victory. I know you were there. You were inside those vacuous, empty stadiums. Give us a kind of overview. Give us your kind of take on what we witnessed, and then we'll delve into a little bit more details as to what we witnessed on the field.
Yeah, Chris, I think, first on the tour, I think just to get it happening, given everything that the pandemic has thrown at us over the course of the last 18 months, there was talks of taking it to Australia, talks of potentially moving it to the United Kingdom. And the bold decision was taken to actually make sure that it goes ahead in South Africa, albeit without the traveling, Red Army of fans, or without any fans in the state in South Africa. It was extremely weird, to put it bluntly, to be in that void of an empty stadium, having the experience of playing against the Lions in 2009 and just running out onto Kings Park, Loftus, and just seeing the sea of red, being mesmerized by what happens on the field, in the stadia. It just felt shallow or hollow, and I think I really felt for the players, because all professional athletes over the course of the last 18 months have been so adversely affected through the pandemic, and for something as special, as unique as a Lions tour to go ahead without any fans in the stadia. And then to throw on top of that, not only was South Africa going through the third wave of the pandemic, but there was civil unrest, there were riots happening throughout the country. The last 2 weeks the tour got moved all the way to Cape Town. So it was a weird tour, to say everything, to be in the stadia, hearing how physically competitive each and every tackle or collision point was, hearing the water boys and the reserves and players on the sideline in your ear was really, unbeknown to all of us. I take my hats off to the players and the staff and everyone involved, that they continued fighting to make sure that the tour went ahead despite COVID cases in both camps, despite the civil unrest happening in South Africa. I mean, there was also a lot of off-field things that potentially dampened what is the speciality and uniqueness of a Lions tour, unfortunately. So it might not be remembered for the actual rugby, which I think is a little bit unfortunate, but I think for the Springboks to come away from a 19-month rugby wilderness battle, to play one warm-up game ahead of a Lions series and win it. I'm not quite sure if that says how good the Springboks are or how adversely less good the Lions were in terms of their preparations.
It's a great point, that, and I know Tom and I spoke about this, and I don't want to be disrespectful to your beloved Springboks, Bryan. Well, you might be, depending on your answer to this question here.
Early statement, by the way, Chris.
Yeah, I know. I'm throwing it out there
because he's about to be disrespectful.
I've got to do it. Did the Springboks win it, or did the Lions lose it, Bryan?
I think it's a bit of both. I think there was obviously a lot of off-field stuff that I really believe influenced a lot of the test matches, a lot of the decision making. I think the Lions had opportunities in that third test to potentially put themselves a little bit further ahead. Not only from a potential going for post perspective, decision making on field. I think the Springboks suffocated and strangled the Lions, and unfortunately, I think the Lions' preparations towards the test series probably wasn't ideal. There was weakened opposition. They had to play the Sharks team twice, and one of the UK journalists actually says, why would Warren Gatland, want to take a shotgun to another barrel of fish, 3 days later, because it's not really going to help them in terms of their preparations. So I think it was a little bit of everything, and I think you feel for, again, what should have been a really special occasion for everyone involved. Obviously, the Springboks winning, they will take that. I think the Lions, for us, I was obviously fortunate enough to be in studio with Sky, and we sort of got to that third test, and we hadn't really known or could figure out how the Lions actually want to play rugby. In the first two tests, it was sort of, okay, well, are they going to try and match the Springboks in the kicking game? Or are they going to try play an attacking brand of rugby? And I think to their credit, someone like Finn Russell came on 5 or 8 minutes into that third test and was phenomenal. And like I said, I think it's a bit of both. I don't think the Lions only lost it. I definitely think the Springboks played their part in winning it. And I think there were some series making moments. I think Sia Khaleesi in the second test, where he had that try-saving tackle, which I thought was phenomenal against Robbie Henshaw. I mean, how that wasn't grounded. That moment of, and he's a great bloke, Sanjay Williams, Liam Williams, who had opened Josh Adams, to run through and score a try. So there were moments in that you believe, shaped the way the series ended up. But I honestly believe it's a bit of both, Chris. I think the Lions, played their part in losing it, and the Springboks most certainly played their part in winning it.
Brian, one of the things, just thinking back to 2009, and the world has changed so much, right? So we've seen the growth of social media and Twitter since 2007, and it wasn't part of your series. Mm. I think back now, and I see some of the vitriol that we saw between fans online is not what the Lions is known for. Do you think that the opportunity for the South African fans and the British Lions fans, the green and the red, to spend time with one another in Durban and in Joburg and in Cape Town actually meant that there was only negativity online and we didn't get to have the joy that sometimes that tour would bring?
I agree 100% with you on that one, Tom. And not just the joy. And I've actually chatted, and you mentioned Brian O'Driscoll, and we've had a lot of banter since I retired, and been able to be on a number of HSBC series tournaments around the world together, where he sort of took me under his wing in Dubai in 2018, and sort of bled me in nicely. But we chatted about the legacy that the Lions leave, and I talk about, yes, it is about the rugby. The rugby is the most important thing, but the Lions is so much more than just the rugby. It's the fan engagement, and you hear the players talking about going on safari in South Africa and experiencing going to the rural townships. And I remember in 2009, alongside HSBC, the Lions went into one of the rural townships in South Africa. They not only did like a training session, autograph session, they built change rooms, they donated kit, and that legacy has now spanned. We actually sort of went back in to see if we can continue that legacy in some way. But when the players aren't allowed out of a biome bubble, just because of restrictions and protocols, the fans aren't allowed to engage. Again, do we lean? And I think social media has unfortunately been a very negative stigma in terms of how critical people become and not understanding the mental wellness, and it has put an added microscopic lens on every little detail. And yes, as professional athletes, you work extremely hard every day of your life, but all of a sudden the negativity always seems to rise to the top more than the positivity. And I think we saw a lot of that negativity, and that vitriol across the tour was not really pleasant. And you try uplift the game, but it's just so difficult, even as a pundit or presenter, to try overcome all the negativity and just focus on the rugby, because unfortunately the rugby was all we had on this tour, which is again unfortunate for the players.
I think about what even Cape Town should be as a visiting team, right? And I understand, were the Lions staying at Arabella just outside Hermanus?
Yeah, they were.
So even the idea that they're 50 kilometers away rather than in the heart of Cape Town, and those sea of red people spilling out of Caprice on the seaboard on a Sunday evening, that's what that should be, right? And I tell you what, in 12 years' time, as long as the Lions stay what the Lions is, it'll be very, very special.
Yeah, it will be. And I felt bad. I mean, the Sky crew actually had to get out to Arabella like twice a week. And I mean, if you don't know South Africa, there's, again, just that N2 road out. It's very dangerous. There's a lot of things. And they were having to do it twice a week just to get an interview. And then it was like a social distance interview. And Sarah Algan, actually had a thing with Josh Adams. He'd had a baby, during the course of the tour. She gave him like a gift, and it was like, yes, but like you're like 4 meters away from me. I can't really like embrace you and show this. So yeah, it's weird. And I'm hoping, again, I think in 4 years' time, Australia will hopefully be, we would have hopefully, I think I'm saying that with a lot of touching of wood at the moment, we'll see a pandemic COVID-free in terms of regulations, restrictions, and fans being able to travel. But we'll just see that legacy around it not just being about the rugby. We'll be able to see a lot more than that. And hopefully in that, the pride and the privilege of a Lions series, both for the the Northern Hemisphere, for unions, and also for the Southern Hemisphere teams, will be restored. And the positivity that surrounds each and every moment, not just the rugby, will be appreciated. Because I think we actually then now look back at this last tour and we appreciate what we got to experience in 2009, in 2013, 2017. And we slowly but surely start to appreciate a little bit more about life when things that really give you so much joy and so much entertainment all of a sudden get taken away from you.
Brian, one last thing on that is what we saw in the Lions tour and some of that vitriol, and we don't need to talk about that, in comparison to the Olympics taking place at the same time, also behind closed doors with the Sevens. And for me, somehow there was a completely different energy that came from that tournament. And whilst, perhaps it's not the crunching tackles that you can hear, but you can hear people's lungs coming out of their throats in quite a slightly different way. But the interview with Ruby Tui, which I know that went global, but that's
amazing.
the joy that sport brings, and one of the exciting parts. And do you think there is a bit of a difference in the way that spectators and players behave on the Seven Series because they're living in a hotel together, and there isn't quite the same rivalries in the same way, that they don't come negative?
Tom, I'm going to be brutally honest. I think the magnanimous occasion that is a British and Irish Lions series, the pressure that surrounds it, and the fact that it only happens once every 12 years, there's just a lot more pressure, focus, determination to potentially do anything to make sure you win it. And unlike the Sevens series where you're potentially playing 6, 7, 8 tournaments a year, you're getting to go to the Olympics, it's just the combined pressure of it all. And I think that Ruby Tui interview, it's not the first time we've seen it, and it's something that the Black Ferns have just made us love about their work ethic, their sisterhood that they've developed, the manner in which they portray the game to so many. And I tried my best I was on the HSBC 7 circuit for a couple of tournaments back in 2016 in trying to get to Rio. Unfortunately, I think age and Neil Powell trying to clean me out at breakdowns just didn't work for me in any way.
It's always weird when your coach is trying to clear you out, by the way.
I was like, Neil was only like 2 or 3 years older than me, and that first session he properly physically dealt me a blow, and I was like, mate, I'm like 33. Like, why are you doing this? Like, you don't need to do this to me. I don't need to prove anything. And he just kept coming. And then I got to witness, the bliss box going on to get bronze at Rio, and just seeing how rugby sevens got embraced in Rio. I mean, the players themselves were talking about how the other athletes actually came to watch the rugby. It was that impressive. The Australian women's team, winning gold in a manner in which no one thought it was possible. I think it was brilliant. And I think that, has seen the joy around sevens, the camaraderie that is just openly there to be seen by everyone. And you do miss it. And again, I think that interview that Ruby did with Jill Douglas was not only phenomenal, but it just showed the pure heart of sevens. It showed the respect that the players have, for each other, for the public, for the game. And unfortunately, the Lions series saw a lot more on the other negative of that vitriol, unfortunately, because again, if the boiling pot is just so pressurized, it is really difficult to try to separate, the ends you potentially would go to gain victory.
I just want to stick on that if I can, Brian, because there might be some people that actually forget that you were serious. You tried to get into that South African Sevens team back in 2016. Ultimately, of course, the decision was taken by Neil to go with 12 different players. I mean, where does that rank in terms of your biggest disappointments in your career? Because this wasn't a gimmick. You were serious about trying to get into that team, weren't you?
I was extremely serious. I think I actually missed out thanks to Murad Boudjelal and Toulon on the Commonwealth Games in 2014. And that was sort of going to be like a process of where I started getting into the seven setup to be able to make Rio. And I was gutted because I was actually, I never forget, I was sitting in my house in Toulon, all on my own. My wife was back in South Africa. And I saw the boys go on and win gold in Edinburgh, I think, or Glasgow. And I was like, I should have been there. And I was extremely proud, but there was like this resentment of like, I had that opportunity, Rusty had phoned me, like we put everything in place, and there then been sort of a 2-year journey. And obviously the Toulon thing, sort of got to the back of my head, and I actually had a massive sit down with Bernard Laporte end of 2015 when this whole sevens are potentially trying to make the Olympics came about. And he said, okay, well, if you're going to try for sevens, then you got to leave the club. And that just infuriated me, and it actually made me more determined to actually try and make the sevens, not to prove them wrong or prove myself right, just to know that I could do it. And I mean, you talk about sacrifice, everyone sacrifices, but I think we lost the game against Bordeaux. I had to get on a plane back to South Africa. My first training session, I was like, Brian, what are you doing? Like, do you really want to be doing this? You're like, I couldn't breathe. My lungs were like busted. I was like 10 minutes in, I was like, wow, this is going to be a long week. And then we had and not that anyone understands the sevens environment, but being a 15s player, you fly business class around the world. I've been flying business class for 12 years. We went Cape Town, London, JFK, Phoenix, Vegas, 42 hours door to door, all economy class. Brian hadn't flown economy class in about 10 years. That was a pretty rude awakening.
It's the difference between Ruby Tui and the Lions Tour again, by the way. Man of the people, right?
Proper. So I was extremely serious, and I was sort of gutted because I actually got injured ahead of the London and Paris tournaments that Neil said I needed to play at least 4 to be able to make it. And I sort of knew after those 2 tournaments, even though I got just sort of pulled into the training camp ahead of the actual squad being announced, I sort of knew my chances were gone. And then I looked at the likes of a Cheslin Colby, a Jean de Jong, a Francois Hoogaard, who had also been playing the 15s game and managed to then make the sevens in Rio. But again, just have known that I was a part of that. I'll never forget, we arrived in Vegas, I bought all the guys Starbucks coffees, and it was like a brotherhood. It was like I was accepted immediately. Some of my socks were stolen in the laundry because everyone's laundry gets put together. It doesn't get delivered separately to your room. I had to carry you got assigned a certain job that you had to do, whether it was carrying the medical bags. And I had a British Airways gold card, and I was like, the manager came and said, Brian, we actually need your extra gold cards, like luggage ability to pack some more stuff in for the tour. I was like, but I need to go back to Toulon. That can't happen. So no, I was extremely serious. Obviously gutted that, again, I didn't make it, but seeing the boys go on and get the bronze medal in Rio, and seeing the determination and knowing that I potentially played a small, albeit minuscule role, in that happening, still it didn't make up for the disappointment, but it at least softened the blow just a little bit, Chris.
You mentioned there that you kind of knew, Neil had said to you, you need to play 4, you only played 2. I would have imagined, however, when he breaks the news to you, it's still, you've said it, you were disappointed, you were devastated not to make the squad. Was it face to face, Brian? I've spoken to a lot of players that tell me, certainly speaking to Mike Phillips recently, and some of the stuff he was telling me about Warren Gatlin kind of sticks in the throat a little bit. He received an email to tell him that his career was essentially done and dusted at Wales. There was none of that with Mr. Powell, was there?
No, again, Neil is probably one of the most genuine, hard men, but humble humans that you'll ever find. And I mean, it can never be easy as a coach to give a decision positive or negative, because even in the positive decisions, there is a thought, an idea that you still have to be negative somewhere. And we were all training at the Stellenbosch Academy of Sports, and it had been a brilliant week. I was it was raining and it was winter, and I was like, oh, Bryan, but you still sacrificed, and just that brotherhood kept you going. And Neil actually had a one-on-one with each and every player, just saying, this is the plan, this is where I see you fitting in. And I think I was old enough and experienced enough to not only respect that, but value that he'd have that front-facing, honest, open, transparent conversation, which I knew wasn't easy. I've not had to do it in my life before, but I've been involved where, like say, you've heard players get an SMS, or, I got my last ever experience with the Springboks, for instance. I didn't get told this was going to be my last time ever. I sort of just got left out of the squad, and I got left out of the squad. So it was, again, a lot of respect for Neil, the manner in which he did it. And I think, seeing where the Springbok 7 side has come, post Chester Williams, post Paul True, Neil really has brought something extremely special. And I think for that, the team is grateful and extremely privileged to have someone in that position that was as open and transparent. And they unfortunately didn't have him in Tokyo this year because of COVID.
Yeah. Bryan, just on the Blitzbokker, I think everybody on the series recognises the unity and the brotherhood that you've spoken about there, and I'm sure most people realise that it's an incredibly diverse demographic of players and backgrounds, as is the case with so much rugby in South Africa. Bringing a high performance culture and brotherhood is challenging at the best of times when everybody's from different backgrounds. What is it that continuity from winning that World Series under Paul True to what we've seen of the Blitzbokker over the last, what is it that's bound that squad together?
Tom, so I think firstly, it definitely has been the professional rise of sevens over the course of the last 12, 15 years. We all know the big bang, in 2009, 2010, when sevens got included into the Olympics for 2016, played a massive role in teams across the globe really starting to understand sevens is not just going to be a feeder system for 15s. It's not just going to be for young players that are trying to, or that don't make the cut. It's really going to be a fully structured. And I think what we saw leading into 2016, the likes of myself, Sonny Bull, Quade Cooper, that really tried, and even Sonny Bull, as brilliant a rugby player as he was, unfortunately got injured in Rio in 2016, replaced by Liam Messam, who started his career out as a sevens player, back with me in 2004. So I think the professionalism of it all, I think the likes of a Chester Williams, who really took the game from a South African perspective and said, listen, we're not just going to be mucking around. We're not going to get, these left-handed players that don't know how to pass, anyway. We're going to start making this thing extremely professional. Paul True then took over and became extremely rigorous in the professional era. And I think not only is there a brotherhood, but Tom, you'll know, the Springboks, or the Blitzbokker, potentially punch much higher than the actual weight. I mean, they're not, in comparison to the likes of Fiji, New Zealand, even Australia, much like Great Britain, they're not the biggest of blokes, but I think the manner in which they wear their heart on their sleeve and just go at it full tilt. There is a clear structure that they stick to, but within that structure, they're allowed to show their individual brilliance. But I think the work ethic, and I got to experience that firsthand, being there in 2016, and just seeing how they don't leave any stone unturned from a preparation perspective, but make sure that on that field, they can not only look themselves in the mirror, but they can look the person next to them in the mirror and know that they've given 110%. And that is special. And I think we see that across the series, to be brutally honest. It's not just the Blitzboks. I think the Fijians and the manner in which they play the game is something that so many idolize around the world, so many would love to do. But again, someone like Ben Ryan, came in and put in a professional culture of how things, and that is just, because once you've tasted success, I think it becomes really difficult to not want to keep that track record going.
Yeah, it's funny you say about punching above your weight. We always say that you would neither want to meet Werner Koch in a ruck or down a dark alley.
No, thank you. No, I met him in a ruck a few times at training. I mean, I don't want to say between him and Neil Powell were the two that I wanted to throw a punch against the most, but between him and Neil Powell, they...
And Bryan, you talk about that enigma Bujatal in Toulon. I bring this up. I know that Chris and I wanted to chat about it. So many of our listeners will, they love the game of sevens, but that Toulon squad that won 3 Champions Cups in a row is in the hearts of many. I mean, I went to Cardiff in the Saracens final and roared on. roared
let's
on.
not bring up that. Let's not bring up that game.
But roared on
that
Toulon, right? And I was reading this morning. There's an article with Gavin Mortimer, and he was talking about players that were born and came through the very ends of the amateur era, so turned professional in the late 90s, and their relationship with the sport. And they were using many of of your teammates in Toulon as an example of putting together a group of people that had personal responsibility, that hadn't been pampered, that were intelligent men on and off the field in a different environment. And you had characters like Gitto doing, you know, the fastest 100 meters in flip-flops, and then you had the work rate that Jonny had, and it meant that in 2014, I think it was that, or was it 2014 when you beat Cast in the final?
Yeah. 14,
they played God Save the Queen at the end of it to say thank you to Jonny. And I mean, that must have been a remarkable era to just spend time with people from all over the world sharing that.
It was an incredibly remarkable era, Tom, to be brutally honest. I'd obviously signed, and you know, people say the money is not all that you sign for. They're talking crap, but the money plays a part, but it definitely wasn't the only part. I was sort of at the point in my career, I just turned 31, 32. You know, not that I was stuck in a rut in Toulon, in Cape Town, but I just wanted something different. I wanted to be around people that really just pushed the limits in terms of work rate, ethic, and the manner in which they portray their life. And I got to Toulon, and it was the weirdest thing ever. Obviously, like the marquee signing of the year, a lot of pressure on me to perform. 2012 had gone really well. I was the S Rugby Player of the Year. And then I got there, I played 2 warm-up games in pre-season. I got back from the Springboks injured after the Tri-Nations. Didn't play, I think, for 3 weeks. Played 1 game before heading over to the Autumn Internationals with the Springboks. Came back, had 2 games, one which was the second game against Exeter Chiefs at Sandy Park. Got injured, tore my hammy off the bone. I was out for 4 months. So for me, it was like this, like Murat Bujilal had me like doing signing sessions on my own, like properly working for my back. But just being involved around those players and coming back from injury then, and leading into that success of the double in my first year of playing rugby alongside the likes of Johnny Gitz, Bucky Spuerto was there, Ali Williams, Cole Haymans. I mean, it was, they want to say Galacticos, and there'd have obviously been a lot before me actually getting there about people saying, they're mercenaries, it's just a bunch of players that can give them a lot of money to win. And then when we started winning, all of a sudden people were like, okay, well, it's more than just the money, it's more than just players, coming to experience the French Riviera. And I think for me, getting to be alongside the likes of a Johnny, a Drew Mitchell, and a Matt Gitta, who ripped everyone to pieces from a joking perspective, but on field brought it each and every time. Carl Heyman was one of the strongest humans in a gym. I'll never forget, like Joshua Tusava was 19 when I got to Toulon. He was a skinny little Fijian boy that was sort of eating weird noodles and stuff because he couldn't find Fijian food in Toulon. But it was a team managed really well, but it was also a team that, for the first time in my career, I was able to witness if the right personnel is in the right position and they are all exceedingly good at what they do, it is possible to achieve success without putting the pressure of playing professional rugby. And we played so much of that rugby with pure joy. There was always pressure, but I think the skill level, the Steph Armitage was the European Player of the Year 2 years in a row, a phenomenal player that you sort of wondered, could England during that time not have used a player of his caliber and class to go on and achieve some sort of success? So yeah, it was pretty special. I think for everyone, yes, the money's good, the lifestyle's great, but I mean, there's a lot of sacrifice. My wife had fallen pregnant the day we went, like the time period went over. She came back to South Africa. I was alone for the last 2 months of that season. Yes, you achieve success, but there's learning a language that Toulon is not a big metropole like Nice or Paris, Toulouse, or it's a French village almost. And if you don't speak French, you're gonna struggle. So there's so many sacrifices, but I'm so grateful that I got to experience that. And like I say, the manner in which, God Save the Queen at Stade de France after the top 14 final, it's crazy. It's crazy to even think that, but it was pretty special, to be honest. And good memories made, but friendships, Gets actually messaged me this week. Him and Adam Ashley Cooper are ending their careers over the LA Guillotines, and it's just you remain. I was in Sydney 2 years ago, met up with Drew, and Juan Lobe just messaged me. He's like, "Hey, but amigo, I'm gonna see you in PE this weekend." I'm like, "Yeah, you're not gonna see me in PE this weekend. I'm heading over the waters for a bit of a family vacation." But just those memories that you get to develop is pretty special. And one of my mates actually said, when it's all said and done, memories are all you have. And being alongside that class was proper memories made.
And French rugby is pretty special in general, right? Like, they are groups of villages that are then represented by 22, 23 men on a weekend. I live in Biarritz, and Steph Armitage now is king of Biarritz, having kicked the penalty to put them back in the top 14. I mean, he'll never buy a piece of tapas ever again. The man's a hero, and that's the special thing I think about French rugby. Is that something that you felt, that representing of Toulon?
Without a doubt, and it's not just the representing of Toulon. I think the passion with which the supporters get a hold of the team. I mean, it was crazy. I'd go to training and there'd be 100, 200 people watching training. And I'd be like, okay, is this the French socialist system that actually allows these people not to work every day to be here? But it was the chômage. But then you get to experience, and you go so for Toulon, we had a really special experience. So we had the gauntlet. So you would meet at Berg, which is our training facilities. We'd all then take the bus to the stadium. And at the stadium, you sort of stop 100 meters away from the change room entrance. And then there's this gauntlet of Toulon fans. And I think it was potentially the weirdest thing for the opposition team, having to walk through that gauntlet and, being shouted at by these painted red and black, masked warriors. But you get that. And then there's, the Pilou Pilou, which is unique to Toulon. And there's the Basque songs that are particularly for Biarritz. And in Paris, maybe not so much, unfortunately, with Racing and Stade Francais, given the fact that they're in a big metropole. But then Toulouse, Clermont-Ferrand, that is in the middle of nowhere. But these people that become the Yellow Army are just so incredulous in terms of their want of wanting their team to do good. So it was so special. And then the songs in the stadium, each and every team has their own unique traditions and vibes and manner in which they... And I think I'm grateful that I sort of got there when Toulon weren't in the Pro de Deux, because Victor Matfield was telling me some of the stories of, you don't win an away game. He said you fight, but you do not win an away game. He said you get punched, kicked. So I think the refereeing had got a lot better by the time I got there in 2013. But that unique experience of the French culture of rugby is something so special, Tom. And I'm grateful that I got to experience that for 5.5 years.
You talk there, the Galacticos, the Harlem Globetrotters, call them what you will, Bryan. And obviously, you're not new to any of these guys, whether it's Gitz, whether it's Drew, Jonny. I mean, his kind of reputation precedes him. Did anyone surprise you once you walked into that locker room at Toulon? Who's the player that perhaps you went, wow, you are perhaps better than I gave you credit for?
Yeah, Jonny was that player for me. I mean, you'd heard stories about the manner in which he trained, the manner in which he focused, and I think I was roommates with him on my first ever tour game away, and I was like, I don't know if I can make a sound. I was like on his laptop talking to his mate on the phone, like, do I bother him? I can't watch the TV because it's in French, so what do I do? Internet's not that good. But he was you'd heard all these stories about him. He was at the stadium the morning of the game practicing his kicking. If he'd missed the kick on the day before and his percentage was 100%, he then on a Sunday would have a 6-hour day going to the gym. I was witnessing this guy, and he was even more phenomenal in close proximity to what he was as an opposition player. And I think just being able to witness that, I then got to sit back and understand why he achieved what he achieved. You potentially got to understand why post 2003 his body was a wreck, because he literally pushed himself. So there were some mornings I went to the gym and potentially post the game or I went, we'll take it easy. Jonny never took it easy. When he was on the training park, when he was in the gym, it was 110% or nothing else. And for me, that was frightening, because I was like, well, if I'm measuring myself up against Jonny, who is potentially one of the best that the game's ever seen, and I'm maybe giving 98 and not 110% each and every time, is but he was phenomenal. And I'd say he'd have these visual sessions the morning of a game. We'd be in the hotel and Jonny would be there, like visual training, he's kicking, and we'd be all like, Doc, is Jonny okay? But
right,
he was just, he was phenomenal, absolutely
Bryan,
phenomenal.
This is totally subjective and from afar. It looked like when he moved to Toulon, despite the fact that he's heaping in all that pressure on himself still in the same way that he was in his years with England and with the Falcons, but there seemed to be a bit more joy even for him and a bit of a release playing in Toulon. Do you think that then came from the people that he was playing with? Like, you were as impressed by him, but he must have grown in the environment that you were creating.
Yeah, so I think when Drew Mitchell and Matt Guitar arrived in their duck tuxedos at a restaurant and Jonny in his tracksuit pants, Jonny was probably second thinking what exactly these two wallabies are doing to him. But I don't know, Tom, to be honest, whether it was just a breakaway from the pressure of playing for England, having that expectation on his shoulders the whole time. He took the first 6 months and really just learned the language, and he got entrenched in the culture. He was the only player to live in Bandol, which is like on the total opposite side of where all the players in Toulon actually lived, where Kakiran or in La Valette. So he lived on the other side of the highway, like literally you had to go under the bridge. Jonny was the only one there. So I think it was a conglomerate of a number of things, but he embraced it, to 110%.
I wonder on that, Bryan, you mentioned Jonny's focus, and we've seen mental health kind of rear its ugly head, and I say rear its ugly head, it's a good thing that it's out in the open that we're talking about it. We've seen Naomi Osaka, we've seen Simone Biles, and I wonder on that. I always remember a conversation, of course, cricket now a key part of what Emirates Dubai Sevens are doing now. It's adding to the wonderful festival of sport at the Emirates Dubai Sevens this year. I always remember speaking to Brian Lara, and he said the word pressure for me, the definition of that doesn't mean a jot to me, because pressure to him, he was impervious to it. He said, in actual fact, the word pressure is just another word in the dictionary. When the going got tough, Brian Lara said he elevated himself. That's where he felt that he came alive. I wonder with you, pressure, you've said there that Jonny dealt with it quite methodically. It was about making sure he was the best prepared on that rugby field on a given Saturday to execute what he needed to execute. Yeah. How did you deal with pressure, your relationship with that during your career?
I'd hope I dealt with it good enough at times. There were times where I dealt with it horribly. I love the pressure and this whole mental wellness thing. I'm not an expert on it. I don't know. I would not know how to measure myself around mental wellness at the moment. So if someone told me, Bryan, you're mentally well or mentally ill, I don't know at what point I'd be able to say, okay, well, if you're a professional athlete, you're constantly under pressure. You're constantly having to perform with a microscope, looking on every little bit of it. You don't have a private life unless you can afford it. And I mean, now being retired, I really can't afford, having a private life. You're not earning the 480,000 euro a week like Lionel Messi at the moment. So I think for me, it's a very important topic to speak about. When we were playing, it wasn't really a topic that was discussed. It wasn't something that people said, okay, now I'm struggling mentally. Well, man up, stand up and be counted. So I really think it is important that these topics of discussion that are affecting people need to be brought to light. I think there's been a number of issues raised, particularly over the last year and a half, that if we're not going to start talking about them and understanding things a bit better, we're not going to be able to appropriately deal with life. And I think life is sometimes more than the game of rugby. And I think where mental wellness particularly is playing now a very important part is that life is bigger than rugby. And I think for me, I embrace that pressure. And there was always a thing of me wanting to leave the jersey in a better place, constantly working, sacrificing, dedicating. And I think there's 3 traits that any successful person unfortunately has to have. That's hard work, dedication, and sacrifice. Because if you're not going to have those 3, yes, you can get lucky at times, but they also say, hard work beats luck when, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard enough. And for me, that pressure was always there for me, but I sort of thrived on it. And I potentially was a player that I expected myself when the pressure was at its highest to perform. And how I then dealt with that, whether I had to keep quiet about things in my private life, whether I had to just focus on other things. I didn't know what mental wellness was or mental health was when I was playing rugby. So I think it is a really important topic, and because there's just so much more education on the matter, I'm like, oh, maybe that time I should have just not kept it in. Because I think as a rugby player, particularly in the male environment, and I think we're seeing now with the women's, but particularly in the male environment, there was this machoism in the change room. So you didn't talk about the soft stuff, or that you're now not okay mentally to, or that the pressure is on at home to perform on a rugby field, so you provide for your family and all this. So I think there's just so many different things. And as we now discover a little bit more around mental health, I think it's really important that we be open to the conversation, because I think if we're not open to the conversation, it then makes the conversation that much tougher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I take that on board. In actual fact, I really do. Now, I'm conscious of time for you, Bryan. You've got the family. You say there that you are on holiday. You've had a tough couple of months. Last couple from us, and it's been great to have you on this first episode of the brand new series of Tales from the Sand. I want to ask you what, and again, think very carefully about this answer, Bryan. What does it mean to be a Springbok? I was, and I'm not embarrassed to admit, I was in tears watching Chasing the Sun. Rassie Erasmus, and we'll maybe get to him quickly before we wrap up, he's talking about Mpipi, and he's talking about the fact that there's a man who had no one. And it's powerful. Chasing the Sun is an incredible documentary. You need to watch it if you haven't watched it already. And it got me thinking about what it means to be a Springbok, the culture around being a Springbok. What is it? Give me a definition from your side if you can.
It's a massive privilege, Chris, to be honest. And Nelson Mandela said at the opening of the Illustrious Academy in 2000 that sport has the power to change the world, and being a Springbok has the ability to do something that politics, religion and culture can't do. And I was a part of that in 95. I was lucky enough to be one of the 60,000 sitting in that stadium when the late great icon Nelson Mandela walked out and presented Francois Pienaar with a cup called Bill, and wanting to be the next South African export to go play for Manchester United. My life got flipped upside down, and I sat in that stadium seeing how a team of heroes for me, and yes, the Springbok was potentially seen as a symbol of oppression. It was seen as a potential negative stigma, but for that moment in my life, and I can't talk for Makazole Mapimpi or Siya Kolisi, but for that moment, that changed my life to a manner in which I was sat there and I was like, I want to do the same one day. I want to use sport to unite people and show that no matter where you're from or what background you have, you can do something in playing your part in making life just that much better, giving hope to those that potentially never had it before. And 12 years later, I got that opportunity to win a World Cup and go back to South Africa and sit on a victory parade bus and see kids in the rural townships of the Eastern Cape running a kilometer or two barefoot behind their bus to get a glimpse of their heroes, to get a glimpse of hope, to get a glimpse of possibility. And I think being a Springbok, and Rassie said it in Chasing the Sun, pressure is not playing for the Springboks. Pressure is worrying, like Siya Kolisi when he was growing up, was where his next meal is coming from. He literally went to school to get his peanut butter and jam bread sandwich for the day because that was potentially going to be his only meal. And I think for me, witnessing 95, being able to personally experience 2007 and many occasions where through rugby in particular in South Africa, we united a nation and gave that hope. I can just say it's a massive privilege and honor. And you overcome and you break down so many barriers to life, and it might potentially only be for a brief moment or solace in time in comparison with the huge amount of negative things happening in South Africa. But it really just gives that opportunity to have the honor and privilege of getting to represent a country where sport really can unite and give back like nothing else can.
That's powerful stuff. Listen, hey, that is what it is to be a Springbok, right? It is much more than just wearing that jersey. Last couple, Bryan, I know you've got to shoot off. Rassie Erasmus, water boy. He's not a water boy in a month of Sundays, is he?
I think he thought he was carrying some salt water there for the players' cramps in the third test, Chris, if my memory serves me correctly.
Don't you start. Never in a month of Sundays is that man a water boy.
Let me just bring it back to Dubai Sevens. Bradley Wiggins was the
Yes.
water boy for joining Jack here a few years ago. I'm not sure Bradley Wiggins was ever designed to be a water boy. So in my book, anyone can be a water boy as long as they're a big name and they're at the Dubai Sevens.
Please don't tell HSBC that ahead of this year's tournament. I'm not. I can't run anymore, Tom. I don't want to be running on this.
You can give that one to Nolly and Ben Ryan.
Now you're talking.
There's a few stories about Ben Ryan running, so that'll be fine.
Last one for me, Brian. I did mention it in your introduction, so I've got to come full circle. You told me this a couple of years back, but I did say that you know Brian O'Driscoll better than Brian O'Driscoll knows himself. And I did mean that because you had a bit of a fascination with Mr. O'Driscoll back as a schoolboy, did you not?
I did, and just touching on your point earlier, I started out as a scrum half, and Eugene Eloff sort of said, okay, well, I think you're going to be a little bit big for a scrum half. I see a lot of potential at centre. And back in 2003, he said, well, if we're going to move you to centre, I want you to then potentially study centre play and choose someone that you're going to do a essay on. And I was like, sorry, I finished school 4 years ago. I didn't finish my BSc IT degree at university for a reason. So no, it's just like 5-6 page essay. I was like, oh man, this guy's giving me work. I mean, and then we didn't have like the digital environment of just going to an analysis program and downloading all the games. I was literally like doing VHS tapes from one thing to the other, and did my essay on the great Bryan O'Driscoll in 2003. I mean, we'd seen what he'd done in that Lions series in 2001 in Australia. He'd risen to the echelons of legendary status in a very short period of time, and someone that I believed I could sort of model my centre move around, because I sort of believed we were similar type of build. I was maybe a hair and a half quicker than he was, but he was fairly quick post that 2001 tour. And did a little bit of an essay around Brian. I want to be honest, if we had to get that from Eugene Eloff at the moment, it would look extremely ordinary. It wouldn't even get a 50% at university.
Would it comment on peroxide blonde hair? Did you ever consider that was going to be a good option for you in the census?
No. One of the asterisks definitely had you got to wear gloves. One of the asterisks was you got to wear gloves. I went to go buy gym gloves and not the official rugby gloves, but it was it was very short, very sweet. Just making sure how he read off players. The lines of support that he was running, the manner in which he got the ability to identify like running against the forward instead of running against the back, and how effectively he did that. It was a very basic, I don't even think I'd pass now if it was a university thesis. That would be, I mean, by the fact that it's only 5 pages, of which 4 pages are probably like diagrammatically inserted just to make sure that
just fill the space.
Fill the space. But I think, again, just talking about Brian, and I'd obviously played against him quite a few times for South Africa against Ireland, once or twice, Toulon against Leinster. And I don't want to say I had this fascination, but just hearing the stories around the HSBC series and the type of ambassador he was, I was extremely lucky to, in Dubai in 2018, really be taken under the wing. I mean, I'd never experienced a HSBC and Emirates Dubai Sevens at all in my life. And Brian literally took me under his wing. I mean, I went to the Hex suite and I was like, oh, this is a cool. And then I went to the Premier suite and I was like, Trick was like, you're not going to survive. I'm like, what do you mean I'm not going to survive? And I was like, day one, I'm not going to survive. And my eyes were like these wide. I was like sauces. I was like, I'm not, okay, no, Dricker, you can keep your legendary status. I don't, I'll ease my noviceness into the series, and let's see where Cape Town takes us. But an amazing man that, again, I'm extremely lucky that he's part of the Red Polo gang, along with the likes of a Danielle Waterman and a Ben Ryan. And it is really special, and I think we're all just so excited to get the series back on the go. And hopefully, Dubai in just over, I think it's 3 months' time now, will be the start of Sevens getting back to normality, and the joy that it gives to so many, hopefully even better than the joy that Ruby Tui brought us in Tokyo 2020.
And Brian, we can't wait to welcome you back and the rest of the world, I know for sure, and there'll be legendary status achieved by many, whether that's in the social tournaments, the Vets tournaments, or the World Series tournaments. There are boys out to 100%. Stake Brian O'Driscoll's claim at all times, I promise you that.
Mr. Habana, it's always a pleasure catching up with you. The smile is worth a million pesetas, is what it is, pal. Listen, thank you so much. Episode 1 of Tales from the Sand with a living legend. Yes, he's named after a former Manchester United captain as well. It is the one and only Bryan Habana. Brian, top man, thank you for that.
Thanks, gentlemen. See you soon.
Thank you, Brian.
And that's it.
And it is a wrap. What an absolute pleasure it was then to have Mr. Bryan Habana on the first episode of this brand new series of Tales from the Sand, brought to you by Dubai 103.8. Tom, well done to you. That's all your handiwork, getting Mr. Habana. And he, my friend, is an absolute credit to the sport, is he not?
Yeah, amazing. He's a man who has witnessed and enjoyed and been part of so many layers that our sport has been involved in. So, from sitting in the 95 World Cup final, watching all of that happen, to not being picked for a 2016 tournament, to being involved in France. There's so many stories to tell. We could have spoken to him for hours. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and Bryan, he's always very accommodating with his time. Obviously an HSBC ambassador, a regular to the Emirates Dubai Sevens as well. And he's always very, I take him at face value. Every player that you talk to, they love coming back. And I will say it's your tournament, Tom. Of course, you are one of many, no I in team, but it is your tournament. And to a man and women, they love coming back each and every year.
Yeah, and look, the door is always open to Bryan Habana coming back, that's for sure. And as is the door being open for everyone. Dubai is open. We're in a unique position to be able to welcome the world of rugby sevens back here in December. And we're excited to welcome Bryan and others that we've got on the show over the coming few weeks to what will be an incredible celebration here. And I'm very excited. There may not be an I in team, but there is in winner. And we are super excited for Dubai to lead us out of a really challenging couple of years and lead the World Series and lead sevens as we move forwards into what will be a really prosperous 3 years leading into Paris 2024.
I'm stealing that quote. No I in team, but there is I in winner. Love it, Tom. Don't know where you've got that one from. Where did you find that?
I'm incredibly arrogant, Chris.
I love it. I'll take that all day long, Tom. I'm going to remember that and store that. You're absolutely right to say, though, we've got some incredible guests upcoming over the coming weeks and months. We're hurtling towards the Emirates Dubai Sevens. Big announcements in the last couple of weeks, and we want to finish this opening podcast, if we can, with that. Exciting. It's going to be an Emirates Dubai Sevens, the likes of which, and I'm not over-egging this, Tom, the likes of which we haven't seen before, right?
The Emirates Dubai Sevens is the largest sports and entertainment festival in this region, and festival is the key word. It's an absolute celebration of the best rugby sevens in the world, alongside mass participation that sees over 4,000 people fly in or come locally to play in one of those three sports. That's rugby sevens, netball, or the new sport cricket. But then a really clear pillar of incredible entertainment. We've got 3 live music stages, Beats on 2, the Balearic Day Bar, Frequency on 8, the late night EDM stage. And for those of you that love a sing-along, we're not taking that sing-along away. There'll be covers acts, and I can release today that headlining the Saturday evening will be the Red Knot Chili Peppers and the world's leading Red Hot Chili Peppers tribute band on the Saturday evening. And I promise you, Rugby Rock stage will be absolutely throbbing post the rugby. So we're incredibly excited, Chris. I know that you are for a bit of EDM. I've heard that you're a bit of a house head, and I can't wait. I'm really excited to welcome everybody back. 100,000 people here, December the 2nd to the 4th, and the biggest party that you can find in any desert in the world.
Indeed, I'll be dusting out the glow sticks is what I will be, Tom. Listen, bless you, my man. Episode 1 in the can. Bryan Habana, ladies and gentlemen. And we will be back with another episode, another monster name from the world of rugby upcoming in the next couple of weeks. But Tom, for now, my man, bless you. We'll catch you up soon.
You're a good man.
Dubai Sevens, Tales from the Sand. On Dubai Eye 103.8.